is it a queer book? That's the first thing I ask. And then they're like, what's a queer book? Wow. My ideal world is people loving each other, accepting each other, respecting each other. My ideal world is also a place where people can feel like themselves, like they don't have to act, where they don't have to put on a mask just to go outside, pretend to like people they don't really like. It's fine, you can just be yourself. That will be my ideal world. My name is Thomas Philip Acid, and I'm the owner of the only 100% queer bookstore in the Netherlands, in Alkmaar. So the reason I started this bookstore is because I felt like growing up, coming of age, I was missing a place like this. I really wanted to feel represented in queer literature, and it was difficult for me to find. I'm 35 years old now. When I was a teenager, it wasn't as easily accessible, these kind of books, and I really wanted to change that. So one time, me and my late fiance, we were browsing stores in Berlin, in Germany, and they have a couple of small bookshops who are queer owned and queer oriented. And so we were like, okay, this is what we were missing, and we want to build a place that can fulfill that destiny for younger teenagers. They need to have a space where they can be themselves and find themselves represented. It gives them a sense of belonging, like they are allowed to be alive. That's like the main big thing. Being queer can be very confusing because it's a very broad term, very broad spectrum. You need some help finding out where in that spectrum you might belong. And even if you come to find out you don't like any of the labels, that's fine too. But books can help with that. When you're reading something and you see like a main character actually going through what you're going through, that's very self-affirming. It gives you a great feeling. And so the idea was born. And yeah, like 6 months later, we looked at the lease for this place, and yeah, we went for it. Went all in. Top three queer books for adults. Anything by Akwaki Amazi. They're a non-binary author, person of color, and they write in different genres, all adult. They've written poetry that's been published. They've written a thriller book. They've written lots of literary fiction. And I feel it really encompasses everything queer people may struggle with. So anything by that author is a definite yes. Same goes for River Solomon. I kind of want to recommend a fantasy book they wrote to you. It's called The Deep, and it's about mermaids, but there's so much more underlying that really, oh, it's amazing. You should definitely read that. River Solomon is actually an intersex author, and that's pretty cool. So that's always in those books, represented in one way or another. Then a book that's come out pretty recently, last year, it's called Martyr. It's about an Arabic gay boy who's coming of age, is really struggling with becoming a martyr, as he says. So he wants to deny his faith, deny the way he's been brought up according to his religion. In doing so, he moves to New York, where he finds an artist who's really holding his hand through all of it. And he's really has this internal struggle with himself, and it's just a beautiful story. Of course, there's the Heartstopper titles. They're great. They're the books I wish I had when I was younger growing up. It's very sweet, very cool, but it does touch on some heavier topics, but it does so very well. I really like that. It came at the right time. It was very early in LGBT acceptance of this newer generation. TikTok, Facebook, Netflix, Instagram, everything was on the rise, and then Heartstopper came out. So it was really the right place, right time. But also, let's not underestimate, it's really good. Alice Oseman really did a good job. It's really good writing. Everyone does benefit from reading queer books. I think queer literature is certainly on the rise. There's some really popular titles like Kitchen from Banana Yoshimoto. It's inherently queer, but people might not pick up on that, and I like that. I like that a lot. Or A Little Life by Hana Yanagihara. People have read that book, and it's very, very popular. We're called the Queer Boekenkast, so that usually acts like a little bit of a barrier to some people, maybe. But I think that's okay, because that's usually the people who are not curious enough. So they might not go in here, and that's fine by me. But when they're ready to go in and ask some questions or look around, they're more than welcome to. First and foremost, we're a safe space for queer people. And that's very important to me, to actually have the queer people here. A thing I always say is like, a good book is a good book. There's some non-queer books I also read, and I enjoy them. I might even rate them 5 stars. And I'm happy to think it might work the other way around for some people as well. I know I have some titles that people have read because they're just very popular, and then they're like, "Oh, is that a queer book?" And then they might be from a queer author, or it might be such a minor detail within the story that they might not have picked up on it because they're not in the scene, basically, or in this bubble. But it's in those books, and yeah, it works that way. From the outside, it's pretty clear what kind of shop we are. We have the progress flags, 2 of them outside, and there's a rainbow sign pretty big on the sidewalk. But still, people might not really pick up on that. It's usually some older people who come in and they ask me for a certain title that other local bookstores might not have. And I'm like, well, is it a queer book? That's the first thing I ask. And then they're like, what's a queer book? And then I'm happy to explain a little bit. And I usually get pretty solid reactions like, oh, okay, wow, that's interesting. And you're the only one in the country. That's great. What usually does happen though is that parents bring in their child who might be on the LGBTQ spectrum, and they show their kid around, or they ask for information on certain subjects. That usually warms my heart, parents coming in and supporting their kids like that. Usually what also happens, and I love that, is like the grandparents come in. Grandma wants to show them around and stuff, and it's just amazing. And then we get like the odd kid who never really felt like they fit in anywhere, and they just go sit on the floor here and read a book, and I love that. The queer spectrum is very broad. What I found recently is that there's more transgender representation in young adult books. That's more up and coming since the last 5 years or so. They were a lot harder to find back in the day, but now they're much more present. But usually within a book, there's multiple representations available within a story. Of course, there's a lot of terminologies, but there's a few that we like to use here when it comes to literature. 2 of them is Achillean or Sapphic. I like them because they're very inclusive. For instance, if you're non-binary, you might not relate to be called a lesbian. For some people that label works, for others it might not. So we have a word that's inclusive for everyone. That basically means anyone loving anyone. For the women's side, that's Sapphic, and that has to do with ancient Greek mythology, Sappho. And then there's Achillean, that does the same, but then man with men, and that's because of Achilles. Am I explaining this right? Yeah, okay. In store, we have about 2,000 titles. On the web shop, it's just a fraction of that. If there's a book on there you want but you can't find, just send us an email and we can always order it for you, or maybe we already have it on our shelves. That's where you can find us, thequeerboekenkast.nl. We ship internationally. We're on Instagram and TikTok, and it's all the Queer Boekenkast.